The UK Conservative Party are enemies of the people. Now, this is a very direct and stark thing to say, but it's one that really needs to be said, because if you don't say it, then you allow excuses for the Conservatives to be generated. And I think the enemy of the people line is a direct one and really has to be expressed to exemplify the clear attacks on the people of the United Kingdom that the Conservative Party are making through their policies. So you look at the way the NHS, or National Health Service, has been handled by the Conservatives, and unnecessary cuts have been made to the spending the organisation has. And consequently, this has led to a rise in waiting times, hospital beds being reduced. You look at hospital funding being cut to the point where entire areas of the country are let without hospitals for the people to access, which leads to massive travelling for both the users of the health service and the ambulances, which obviously leads to more money being spent and more cuts being needed. And consequently, the Tories are trying to introduce private companies into the NHS. And this is a really dangerous mantra to set, because you allow the free market to infect the health service and price out poorer people from accessing the service. And obviously, when you have money introduced into health in any market, especially healthcare, you enable the exploitation of lower earners in society. And ultimately, this is negative for society because you end up with an unhealthier population. And the fact that the Conservatives do this and do nothing to address this shows they don't care about the healthcare of their citizens, because they expect poor people who don't have the money to fund their spending on healthcare to ramp up massive bills for necessary and urgent treatment. And I think it's disgraceful that they can position themselves in as a party whilst ravaging the service, which has been one of the main successes of the United Kingdom for decades. And we move on to education. Recently, Theresa May has announced her £250 million grammar school project. And this is something which, again, shows the introduction of a free market into a crucial element of society, and thus the danger in a society that Conservatives could bring. If you allow for education to be something to pay your way into, predominantly in society, then you cause an economic imbalance between peoples of the United Kingdom. And this leads to a difference in people that can have economic power, educational power even, through society, because people who can afford better education will pay for that, leaving huge chunks of the working class and the lower earners in society left behind. And this ultimately leads to the defunding of inner-city schools due to their supposed inability to sustain high results. But really, it's the indifference by the government in allowing an entire generation of children to fall with lesser education and less funding, and ultimately produce schools that can't compete with the grammar schools, receiving funding not only from the government, but then also from richer earners and parents who can afford to send their kids there. And again, this allows the working class to be exploited by giving them less opportunities through their lack of education comparatively to the upper earners, and a disparity between where a child can go in their life and the opportunities they have. And the fact that this has been pushed so fervently from the government, despite the fact that it hasn't worked in the past and education was improving under the previous government, shows that these people in the Conservative Party are not friends to the workers of the United Kingdom. Again, another area that's going to be affected by the free market even more than it already is energy and transportation. We look at the way the Conservative governments have handled transportation and the lack of funding in certain areas of the country. The north of the United Kingdom is receiving far less funding for its railway services and bus services than any other part of the country. And consequently, the state of the railways in the north is diabolical. You allow the private market to have complete say over the customers of the service, and as a result, millions find it hard to travel across the country. And when you have your economic centre and main place of prosperity in the United Kingdom, being in London in the south, and give the people in the north poor access to this area, you're naturally going to see a disparity between the prosperity seen in the north and in the south. And thus, the working class, again, that largely lie in the north, is left out. Energy and climate change is another massive area the Conservative government are enemies to the people of. Green policies are hugely important for the future of the planet and for each individual in the world. and everyone should be pushing for them. I mean, at this point, I would hope that climate change is something that we all get behind, and obviously it's not the case in America with the disgraceful actions of the Republican Party over the last decades. But the UK Conservatives continue to push for anti-green policies. You look at the way they've disrupted the progress of housing by scrapping bills which regulated the way in which houses could be constructed. So now, sleazily and cheap house developers can build houses which are unsuitable and ungreen, and thus lead to more environmental pollution and environmental damage. The Conservatives are pushing for fracking, which is universally condemned, and again is going to affect the North more than the South. And they're going to be able to push this through and thus damage massive areas of communities and disrupt the environment of the North. There are many ways in which the problems of climate change can be averted and eased, but the government is taking no actions to do this, and thus remain an enemy to the safety of the people, of not just the United Kingdom here, but the world. Because through anti-green policies, you eventually slow down or speed up the process in which the Earth becomes uninhabitable and dangerous, and through these policies, you're going to see more damage done to the environment, and a speedier time in which this happens. There's also the element of wealth inequality, which the Conservatives do nothing to address. Tax avoidance, tax regulations are weakened and strengthened, or strengthened and weakened even, by the Conservative government, as they allow for individuals to evade tax and corporations to massively save their money from tax. And all the while wages fail to increase and often decrease because of the power that corporations have under a Conservative government, we see through the lack of income tax given to the wealthy, certainly lower compared to other nations, how wealth inequality grows and the working class continue to fall behind inflation and societal prices even. And whilst the government is doing this and doing nothing to address it, and even admitting that it's not going to address it, the Conservatives are enemies to the working class and to the people of the United Kingdom, because they will always serve the interests of those who are more affluent, because their party is funded by them at the end of the day. They allow corporations to treat their workers as though they are just cogs in a machine, and consequently, the Tory party don't see this as a problem, because their sponsors and they themselves are making money, so they can say the economy is supposedly improving, but for most people it isn't. And it's simply because they've lowered the tax and lowered the regulations on these corporations, allowing them to supposedly make more money, but at the expense of the UK public individual. And I suppose a final point to make would be the Conservatives' lack of criticism in the media. The reason you might not hear a lot of what I've said, or a lot of other criticisms of the Tory party, is because they have the power within media and within public criticism to avoid any discussion. The Murdoch influence over media is well known through Sky and through The Sun. But you look at the general discussion around politics in the UK, and a lot of it is to the right. You look at mainstream coverage, and significant political editors are Tories or Conservative or neutral but leaning right. You look at political discourse, and it's always going to be in the arms of the Tories, because they control the wealth, and thus they own the means of production for the news, and thus they can always set the tone to one of narrative which either criticises Labour or opposition and bolsters or deflects criticism from their own policies. Hence why the media does such a poor job of covering the Conservatives, and hence why they still have so much support. And I suppose also they maintain their power through their voting system. The reason it's so hard to get them out of power, despite them not actually winning that many votes, is because of the terrible voting system which we have in the United Kingdom, which only requires them to win more constituencies, and thus keeps them in power as they have enough in certain rural areas of the country to keep the other opposition parties out of touch. And ultimately, I think it's one of awareness that needs to be done, because 2020 is the next UK election, most likely, and the Tories look on their way to be winning that. And I honestly think that if we allow the Conservative government any more time in power, they're going to ravage the country, sell what little public-owned services we have to private corporations, and ultimately this is going to cause severe pain and generational damage to the people of the country, in a similar vein to what Margaret Thatcher did 30 years ago. And ultimately, what I've said in this video and what we ultimately have to face is that the Conservatives are the enemies of the people, and we can't be trusting them any further.